This meeting of the local roadways held on September 15, 2001 is now open. We can all please rise for allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag.
To the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Please be seated. Lisa, can we have roll call, please?
Gail should be on the line. Gail, would you unmute yourself and call the names?
Absolutely. Councilman Citro.
Here.
Danny Jorgensen.
Here.
Una Johnson.
Here.
Christine Valentin.
Here.
Mark Hudson.
He's excused. Sorry.
I think I saw him on there. Michael Marino.
Here.
Peter, can somebody help me with his last name, please?
S.
Peter S.
Till he pronounces it for us.
Okay. Is Melissa Colazzo on?
They were excused today, I believe.
Thank you. David Hay.
Here.
Emily Hinsdale.
Here.
Karen Cashin. Chris Thompson. Larry Josephson. Richard Rank. Karen Kress.
Here.
Matthew Lewis.
Here.
Justin Willits.
Here.
Roger Menendez.
Present.
Jason Jackman.
Here.
Catherine Coyle. Arizona Jenkins. Carlos Ramirez. Chris Milster. Ray Mensa.
Sarah Hendricks here for Raymond Mensa.
Thank you. Anna Quinones.
Brian Ramirez here from Thea on behalf of Anna.
Thank you. Gus Ignis. Sandra Piccirilli.
Here.
Matthew
Here.
Pleasant.
Here.
And I do need to let you know that there is an in-person quorum. Some members are participating virtually because of medical reasons and the local declaration of emergency.
I thank all of you that could be here in person today for this physical quorum. It is so nice to see so many people in person, regardless of the mask or the sneeze guard, excuse me. Lisa, Ms. Silva, do we have any public comment today, whether it be in person or over the phone?
No, I've not received any additional public comment, so we have none today.
Darn. Okay. We have not had minutes taken since August. However, we will need approval of those minutes, and I will give anybody a few seconds to peruse those, and we'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes as written from August 18th, 2021.
So moved. Marino.
I'll second.
All right, Mr. Marino has made a motion. Mr. Menendez has seconded. Do we need a roll call vote, Ms. Silva?
No, just verbal's fine.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposed? Let the record reflect that the motion passed unanimously. All right, are we going to hear today from Hillsborough County Complete Streets?
Yeah, let me make Matt the presenter.
Actually, can you make Paula the presenter?
Okay,
I think she
yes,
does the presentation.
All right, and you're gonna have her flip your slides. Okay, great.
Yeah. All right. Hey, everybody. Good morning. I'm Matt Lewis in my capacity as executive planner in the Hillsborough County Community and Infrastructure Planning Department. Before Paula gets into the Complete Streets Guide, I want to do a little bit of a prologue by talking about the new context classification system that we're doing for county streets in the comprehensive plan. So if we can flip to the first slide of that. What we're doing with context classification is we're bridging the future land use and transportation chapters as well as the transportation and community plans by taking all of the functionally classified roadways, which are your arterials and collectors, and assigning them a context class. So basically what this means is now all our roads have a function for how they're used and a form for how they're designed. And we've assigned functional classifications based on future land use because when you build a road, it tends to last a really long time, and the land uses evolve around it. So you want to get the road right first because you don't want to rebuild it in 10 years. It just seems like a big waste of money. So we've assigned context classifications on the rural and urban transect. We can go to the next slide. So when you look at Hillsborough County's future land use plan, it can get to a lot of use-based things, and the livable communities can tell you where different centers are. But once you're in, like say that urban general area, it's hard to know whether that urban general area is a neighborhood or a main street. That's where the Complete Streets Guidebook comes in. What it does, it defines those typologies and tells you how to identify whether that future land use is meant to give you a neighborhood or a main street, or more of a traditional suburban connector, or more of a traditional suburban neighborhood. And these things matter because depending on what you identify as being the typology, your user mix on that road is going to change. And the elements of the road that are important are going to be modified based on that user mix. So it helps you make sure that even though an area in the suburban portions of Hillsborough County right now might appear to be rural, you know that it's going to have development in the future, and you need some sort of suburban design. And then it goes that one step further to tell you whether that's this neighborhood commercial or a neighborhood regular type of design. Go to the next slide. I'm going to give you an example. This is I-75 and 674 in area just kind of between Sun City and Ruskin. What you're seeing in the aerial is a Home Depot. If we turn on the future land use with the next click, you can see that it's CMU 12. CMU 12 will tell you that with the next click, you're going to have a typology that's either urban or suburban. Based on what you're seeing on the built environment, you know it's going to be suburban. So, and you can look even more closely and know where the suburban residential and suburban commercial is. But until you actually get on the ground, you don't know what type of suburban residential or suburban commercial that is. That's where the Complete Streets Guidebook comes in. So what it tells us is that that suburban residential is suburban residential connector, which means it's one of those roads that connects all the local streets in the neighborhood together and brings people to the major roadway network. And it also tells you that that commercial is regional commercial. The commercial road on the right is serving the Home Depot and the large shopping center. That large shopping center relies on a market area that's way bigger than a walk shed. So it's going to have a lot more auto users, and it's going to have different design elements because of that. But the road, that's the road on the left, I'm sorry, I said right. The road on the right has more local users. They're users that are going to be more frequently accessing it via walks or bikes. They're small scale, dentist office, or a chiropractor in this case. And so that's different set of users is going to have different design elements that need to come into play in the road. So with that, I'll let Paula get into really how the Complete Streets Guidebook takes us that one step further.
Thank you, Matt. So you may be wondering, why do we need a Complete Streets Guide? Why is it so important? So transportation networks for people walking riding a bike or even on a scooter or taking a bus or driving are complex. And as our region continues to grow, the demands will continue to grow, and so do the challenges. So this guide will provide a new approach to more transportation choices, safe streets, connected networks that will encourage more walking and rolling and reduce carbon emissions. It also will ensure that healthy outcomes for all while providing for a better built environment in Hillsborough County. So complete streets will better serve all users of different ages and abilities. So the draft CS guide or complete streets guide has 7 chapters as shown, and I'm going to just provide a very high level overview of what is included in each of these chapters. So let's jump right in. Chapter 1, the introduction. And the introduction chapter sets the stage for the entire document by articulating the purpose of the guide and how it relates to the mobility elements of the comprehensive plan. This chapter also defines complete streets. For example, complete streets is where the entire right-of-way is planned, designed, operated for all modes of transportation and all users, regardless of age or ability. But there is no singular design prescription for complete streets. Each one will be unique and will respond to its community context. So people are at the heart of complete streets approach. So this guide embraces design as a tool to advance the health and safety of the community while promoting sustainable transportation options and vibrant public spaces. So the chapter also outlines the health, the equity, safety, mobility, environmental, and economic benefits of complete streets. But to ensure that the outcomes promised in the Hillsborough Comprehensive Plan can be delivered, the following principles work together to deliver a safe, healthy, and more equitable street system. So the CS guide principles focus on delivering streets that are 1, user-centric. They support the needs of all users, provides for connectivity, protects the most vulnerable. Modal respect, designed for human scale. It prioritizes safety over traffic flow. It creates self-enforcing streets, provides facilities for each mode, and encourages mode shift. 3, context sensitivity. It avoids adverse impacts to communities and people, aligns speeds and design. It activates public spaces, and of course, it encourages safe and desirable accessibility. And last, 4th, sustainable. It talks about increasing tree canopy, sustainable transportation choices, flexible design for adaptation, and even preserves natural features. Chapter 2 covers the elements that go into what a complete street is. Streets are, for example, no longer viewed only as what happens from curb to curb, but rather how it connects to the adjacent land uses. So streets must be very context sensitive. So a typical street has multiple street zones, such as the frontage zone, pedestrian zone, the furnishing zone, the landscaping zone, and even a flex zone that we now refer to as where you put parking or bike facilities. And of course, there's always a travel way for vehicles. But all collectively may actually provide very different functioning streets. So this chapter also outlines physical elements within these realms, such as traffic calming and smart streets, speed management, target speed, and access management. And each of these elements must be considered to ensure that all users are addressed on any given street and road to address connectivity and safety concerns we have in our communities today. So here are some graphical representative elements outlined in the chapter. So look for a lot of new items typically not seen in Hillsborough County streets and roads, including traffic calming treatments such as curb extensions, raised pedestrian crossings, median refuges, speed cushions, and a lot more. There are a variety of also safety or safe intersection control options that we've identified, such as protected intersections and roundabouts and even traffic circles. This chapter also talks about road diets and lane narrowing, so repurposing of street width, which is a major consideration for constrained conditions. And the chapter also informs on the need for pedestrian and bike-friendly wayfinding that tells people how far and how long it may take to get to their destination by bike. Another point to look for in this is the graphical nature of this guide. It does provide some great visuals from national best practices by FHWA, NACTO, ITE, and other communities, and even some regional Tampa Bay examples you may recognize in this presentation. So chapter 3 is about placemaking and its connection to health outcomes. Chapter 3 contains guidance and informs design on the importance of creative placemaking, the elements of a street that will improve aesthetics, livability, walkability, and quality of life. So making streets and roads convenient and comfortable is essential in encouraging and enabling more people to walk and ride a bike or take transit, especially for short trips. And this is essential aspect of street design assist and mode shift. So placemaking is a collaborative design process that engages the public to envision transportation facilities that are functional, beautiful, and a source of community pride. So the chapter contains sections on landscaping, on street trees, amenities such as benches and bike parking and bollards and lighting, and even public art. So the chapter provides guidance on how public art can be integrated as gateway features, for example, the use of lighting and banners in town centers, the use of painted intersections and crosswalks like the city of Tampa does, the use of art in roundabouts, and even the importance of building murals to activate space in our communities. Chapter 4, the street typologies are illustrated for each of the rural, suburban, and urban contexts. Each of the typologies are going to be unique to the level of intended users, their function, and context within the community, right? So for example, the neighborhood commercial typology shown portrays a corridor where small businesses such as hairdressers, convenience marts, etc., support adjacent neighborhoods. So the typology has different elements for each mode of travel. For example, each element is classified as high priority elements, which are the darker orange color, versus lower priority elements, which is the light orange color, and some typologies will even show some optional elements. With each set of typologies, a summary table is provided that also has various desired characteristics for that context. So the rural C1, C2, for example, table shown illustrates all the considerations such as user features, travel zone needs, pedestrian zone, bicycle facility needs, transit traffic calming, speed management, and placemaking, and even building form descriptions. So I'm going to flash through the 11 different street types identified in the guide. And there are two, for example, there are two typologies for the rural context, C1 and C2 on the left side of your screen. In a rural environment, the street elements are few and minimal to preserve the rural nature of the adjacent uses, but still provide the basic elements for each travel mode. For the urban context, C4 on the right-hand side, there are two typologies. And as can be seen, there is a drastic change in context and uses versus the rural typologies. So in an urban environment, look for more user-centric elements and placemaking that responds to the higher levels of vulnerable users on those streets. For the suburban context, there are two residential typologies shown on the left side of the slide, and then there are two town typologies on the right-hand side. Again, each typology categorizes different accessibility functions related to the adjacent land uses and the different levels of users anticipated. For suburban commercial, there are three typologies, different street elements for each of these streets that may contain, for example, local commercial establishments versus streets that may have regional big box or strip centers, or even in industrial zones. So planning and designing new streets or roads is easy, right? However, this guide will provide ample flexibility to retrofit existing streets where right-of-way may not be available to include all the elements that are identified. So adding, multimodal facilities is not an optional element, right? Multimodal facilities are what is missing on most roads, and they are critical. So when we're faced with limited right-of-way, one or more of the following strategies can be used to make room for that needed multimodal facility that may be missing in that particular street. So Think about reducing lane widths, such as lane narrowings, reduce the number of vehicular travel lanes, such as road diets, removal of on-street parking, or provide parking only on one side of the road. So design professionals should evaluate the trade-offs between some of these factors and really define the feasible solution that best accommodates all modes of transportation. Chapter 5 is all about intersections and mid-block crossings. So intersections are the greatest source of conflicts for all modes of transportation in Hillsborough County, and they all represent some of the greatest inefficiencies and inconveniences found in today's street network. So intersections should be designed to maximize the safety of all users, and this chapter covers most of the critical elements at intersections or mid-block crossings. So look for guidance on crossing types and frequency. How often do we need crossings? Look for guidance under the geometry section, for example, that talks about the impact of curve radii has on speed and pedestrian safety. Look for the importance of breaking up long crossing distances with pedestrian refuge islands, or even look for traffic signal control principles that optimize safety, prioritize vulnerable users, and assist with speed management. Chapter 6 is about integrating transit. So as most of you know, public transit serves a vital transportation function for many people. It is their only access to jobs, to school, to shopping, to recreation, and many other daily functions. So nearly every transit trip begins as a walking trip, but the disconnect between transit and road planning means some transit riders are often left to wait at a bus stop that simply has a post in the grass. So for transit to provide optimal service, streets must accommodate transit vehicles as well as adequate and safe access to the bus stop locations and stations. And while we expect that HART will specify transit services, shelters, and other amenities for a given quarter or stop, it is the responsibility of Hillsborough County to contemplate planning and design of the bus stop locations themselves and provide pedestrian and bicycle access to them. In addition, this chapter also has transit integration options for bus lanes, incorporating bus lanes and even BRT lanes, and they are illustrated in this chapter. So the CS Guide design flexibility can easily adapt corridor into becoming transit corridors through lane conversions, which is eliminating travel lanes or removal of medians. And for example, C4, the picture on the Main Street topology on the bottom left could resemble the transformation of Nebraska Avenue, for example, or the regional commercial topology on the bottom right could illustrate how resemble the transformation of Big Bend Road in South County. And chapter 7 is about a few other special considerations. And these considerations include how to accommodate and address emergency vehicles, which is always a hot topic that comes up, implementation of projects and treatments, tactical urbanism, or what we here locally refer to as quick builds, maintenance, adoption of the guide, and even some potential regulatory changes and requirements. So in summary, the Complete Streets Guide is intended to inform and assist a wide variety of local government officials, planners, designers, stakeholders, and even decision makers about incorporating complete streets elements on every street. The guide was developed consistent with a variety of national, state, and local street design guides that include FHWA, NACTO, National Coalition for Complete Streets, while also incorporating best practices from other leading municipalities that already have developed their complete streets guides. And some of these include Miami-Dade, Boston, Deerfield Beach, Montgomery County, Fort Lauderdale, and others. So institutionalizing these best practices will ensure we build back a better transportation network for generations to come in Hillsborough County. With that, Matt?
Excellent. So this is our final TPO Advisory Committee meeting. We've gone to the Citizens Advisory Committee, the BPAC, as well as the Technical Advisory Committee already. Got some great feedback from them. We'll hope that we'll get some great feedback from you guys as well. And then we'll take this information, make a final revision so we can have a formal draft of the guidebook completed. And as the comprehensive plan's mobility chapter goes through the adoption process, we'll have the context-based classification basis for finishing up the guidebook and using it for the long-term design of our roadways. And with that, we'll entertain any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Flores and Mr. Lewis, on this great presentation. Is there any comments, any questions, any suggestions? Yes, Ms. Jorgensen.
I just want to say fantastic, and I'm so excited about this guidebook, this process that you all are establishing. And I appreciate that the county is already working with the city to do these things in advance of this coming out. So like, for example, on future resurfacings, we're doing that, but looking at narrowing lanes and adding more crossings with the RFBs, but I'm really excited about all the potential, especially for the county roads in the city. So it's very exciting.
Mr. Hay.
Again, I think this is excellent work, and it really, it's a combination of, I think, years that the county has been working on this and getting to this point. I think it's, again, Paula has done an excellent job, Matt, everything on this guidebook. I do have a few questions. I thought it was very important that we talk about sometimes the lack of right-of-way, and that was good that we talked about that. I did notice that, and it seemed silent on the utilities issue. A lot of times we have to make sacrifices in our right-of-ways because of the utilities. I know in the city, I've always said, why aren't there more street trees? And I've gotten a response from some people about, oh, there's all this utilities all under the ground and all that stuff, and that it sometimes causes issues. Is under the context classification system, is there some way to address where the utilities can be located underground so it doesn't conflict with like street trees and things like that that are desired, or even the lines over above? I don't know if that's something that can be addressed. I don't know, but hopefully.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Ms. Flores, do you want to answer that question?
Sure, I can get started and Matt can chime in. So utilities are, as you say, critical component to providing the services that all the adjacent uses need, but there's a place for them. And as part of the typologies, we've had great conversations and long conversations as to where within the realms. We talked about, is it right adjacent to the roadway? Is it, behind the sidewalk, next to the buildings? And that will change depending on the context, right? So in more urban environments where you may be challenged with trying to combine all of these elements, I think there's going to be a conversation at the street level with all of the agencies to determine the exact location. But utilities can go in two zones. They can go right adjacent to the intersection or to the travel lanes where it's easily accessible and will provide the least amount of impact if they need to perform any maintenance on them, versus in the backside of the sidewalk closer to the buildings. So, but it is clear, however, I think in everything that we're doing, that no utility should be right, in the middle of the pedestrian zone where people are entitled to, and it is their only mean of access along the roadway. So yes, it's a complex issue. Utilities should not sacrifice the zones, especially for the pedestrian or bicycle zones, but there will be some discussion from block to block, sometimes from quarter to quarter, with all the agencies involved.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent observation, and we'll take a closer look at the guidebook to see how it is. I think one of the difficulties is this could apply to a very simple project like a resurfacing, which may not have the project budget to do a full utility relocation all the way up to a full-blown road. So it would be difficult to do it every time, get the utilities in the right place, but we'll take a look at it from the point of view of how does the designer of the road think about utilities as they're going through the process?
Thank you very much. And one other, sorry. And now I'm putting on my land use planner hat. Out in the county, we sometimes have very large plan amendments that change a land use. How are you envisioning that and it may take it from a rural to a suburban or even an urban category. How are you envisioning that when, we'll say like 1,000 acres or something is changed, that the map, is it automatically changed? Does it need to go through some sort of process to update it? How are you envisioning?
It would, if you were going through a land use change at that scale, it's going to be more than a map amendment. That type of thing will also need to look at, just right now as our comprehensive plan is designed, it'll have to look at the corridor preservation plan as well. It's if you're adding a whole bunch of people to a location, you've got to get the public facilities in place necessary for them to move around from place to place. And with a context-based classification system, changing that from Res 4 to Res 9 might not be a major context change. But if you were actually introducing something that changed an area from a suburban context or a rural context to a urban or suburban context, then you would definitely have to look at not only your corridor preservation requirements, but what is the context that those roads that get built when that area ultimately develops, how do those roads get designed as well? So it would definitely become part of the thought process for when you think about a land use change.
So you're not envisioning like an amendment to the context sensitive map. It's just it has to be looked at when the roads are done.
Yeah, and there's also maintenance that's going to happen along the way when you're doing, like for instance, when the comprehensive plan update revises the future land use plan and deals with housing and transit and future land use altogether, we'll have to go back and take a look at the context-based classification system and see if that C1 through C4 is still appropriate, or whether or not we need a C5, or whether or not some areas that used to be C3C are now C4 or C2. And then anytime you update your corridor preservation plan, you would have to update your context classification system along with it.
Ms. Kress.
Thank you. Great presentation. I'm just always wary that a bunch of public comment or something can kind of throw this out the window when people call complaints. So I'm just trying to understand better what are the triggers, and are these guidelines, are they standards, and what kind of safeguards can be put in place that when you have 50 people from the public coming to comment that they want to drive faster, that that's
So these are designed to be guidelines, but they do inform the standards that come through access management and the ultimate design manuals for the technical construction of the roadways. And I'll let Paula get into the speed issues. But I think a thing to remember is that, say you have your more urban context roads, urban context, because of the user mix, happens at a watershed level. It doesn't happen at a regional level. So that length of road that occurs in a C4 Main Street or C4 neighborhood is not necessarily a 3-mile length of road. There's not a 3-mile watershed. There's shorter lengths of road. It's seconds you're talking about in terms of delay, not hours in traffic. And those are areas where instead of a driveway being your destination, it's a district that's your destination. You park once, then walk. So I think it's just getting a general understanding that C4 is not a barber shop. C4 is a main street that happens to include a barber shop on it.
Right, and I think, it's important to designate and type of this is a guide. It's a complete streets guide. We made sure that even some of the recommendations related to dimensioning are only for the critical aspects, such as how wide sidewalks should be, or crossings, or bike facilities, the critical pieces that really make for a true complete street. And everything else will be flexible and will be determined by the design manuals that the county may have, or FDOT will have, or even national best practices for some of these different elements of complete streets. So a guide in itself, and that's why chapter 1 and 2 is so critical, that really tries to define what are we targeting, what is the vision for streets in Hillsborough County, and that provides the adequate guidance to say, providing safe streets that are going to be sustainable, that are promoting health and equity, and are good for the environment, and treat all users regardless of what street it is so important. So hopefully, based on the crash issues that we have we're dealing with in Hillsborough County, based on the climate adaptation that we need to consider in our region, and based on the health crisis from an environmental standpoint that we're dealing with, we hope that these guidelines will give plenty of the format or the starting block for all streets going forward regardless. But again, they are context sensitive, and like Matt said, what you're designing in a more urban environment or a neighborhood or activity center like the town centers in a lot of our communities may be very different from suburban areas or more rural areas in the community. So it will probably trigger some changes in design manuals going forward, and especially related to the speed ranges, the target speed ranges. That is such a new way of thinking about roads, which is about systemic safety. And in order to establish and, do the right thing when it comes to safety, you have to start with what speed are we targeting that the users of this road should be driving at. And that is critical, and that is new, and that is something that will require a lot of attention as we plan, design, and operate streets going forward, regardless if it's a resurfacing project or a full reconstruction project.
Ms. Kress, have you had your questions answered?
Yeah.
Do you have another?
Well, I'm just still wary that public comment is going to water this down.
Without a doubt, when I get to my question, hopefully we'll get an answer on that one. Ms. Johnson, no, I'm sorry, Arizona's next.
Yeah. Over the gun. If the gun easy to leave, people at the table. So someone's over and they get the gun. And when they want to know where to go, what ground, on new and kind of don't know where to go. If the sidewalks, this is the hell, all in the guy, to be easy to leave, was we could have been there was all know that when we didn't like to get to we have a lot of kids all that. We want to make sure that they will eat that. That if you didn't able or not to levels, or you a guest somewhere in town, you have you from Miami, Cuba, or wherever you from. We put it in different languages. You can read that. You know what I'm saying?
Arizona, your question, I believe, was for not only disabled, but everyone to be able to navigate around on their city streets. Is that going to be available?
Yeah, we'll be in the meetings. So they go get the books. And I open the guy. I want to know where to go. I want to look at the road, where they in the lead, but gotta be in the lead, and will it be in the language?
Will everyone be able to navigate? Will that be easy to read? Will the information be there on our city streets? Is that what you're asking, Arizona?
Will it be, and will it also be in the languages?
Oh, in different languages also.
Well, and I think Arizona, are you thinking that it's an existing conditions kind of map? Where, yeah, see, that's, I don't think this is an existing condition map. It's where we want to get to.
Right. Yes, I agree with that. So, Ms. Flores, do you have any comment on that, or Mr. Lewis? Quickly. Salute.
From a accessibility perspective, everything that is in the guide is really supporting and encouraging that all designers are actually thinking about those that need special services. If you're disabled, following AD compliance, if you're young as a child going to school and what are their needs, or if you're elderly and actually take more time crossing a street. All of those components of all users, all abilities are part of the #1 concern and focus of this guide. So we are cognizant of the needs of all users, and that's why this guide also focuses a lot on our most vulnerable, the pedestrian, the people that have no choice but to walk, ride, or even take transit.
Are we good, Arizona?
Will it be in the languages?
We'll be in different languages, Ms. Flores.
We haven't discussed that, but it's something that we can talk to Hillsborough County about. Yes.
Okay. Good. All right, Ms. Johnson.
Thanks again. This is a great report. I've read quite a few complete street reports, and I guess what I think makes this different is that it is flexible and changing and an evolving document. It's not just something that sits stationary, that there's a map associated with it, it changes. One thing I was, wondering to make it even more special was to maybe highlight more of the street activation. Yes, mobility is one, but the active activity on the streets is also another element that hasn't really been touched on in other complete street guidebooks. And I guess this kind of, linear parks. Parklets are very popular now since the COVID epidemic, whether they were used for seating or in a green space or taking over a parking space. They have different uses. I've seen some places downtown that they've used their green median for a butterfly garden, habitat garden, or even a kitchen garden because they're in need of that type of space. And another is dog parks are very much needed. So of course, not all this fits with every street typology. It would be basically where it's needed, but just having that extra activation and stewardship also, I think, is important for completing that safety grid and what people think as a complete street is you're living on it, you're using it, and you're transporting, yourself along it as well. So just let's make it better.
Will it be, will you able to do that? Will it be placed in the visitor area? Where are you planning on putting the
I'm sorry, Arizona, for.
where are you planning on putting the guide?
Where are you planning on putting those guides? If you're going to incorporate them into these streets? Arizona, I don't think that they have gone down this avenue yet, no pun intended. But I know that Ms. Kress and I introduced a new system of informing people how to navigate around our city, and it's called Ike. And it's like a big phone where you can scroll through different things. It will tell you how to get to certain places, has 911 capabilities, restaurants, arts, theaters, bus, Uber, all sorts of other type of information for both people that are from Tampa, are not from Tampa, handicapped, physically disabled, or everybody. I think that's the wave of the future for what you're talking about. No, not a cheap plug there, but it is going to be a game changer, especially for downtown and other parts of densely populated areas of the city of town.
You do say that they have a vote.
All right, are we good? Let's go with, yes, Mr. Marino is next, and then you, Ms. Cynthia.
Thank you. And yeah, the presentation was great. I know that the thing that I enjoyed was towards the last slide where you take the 4-lane road and make it into a 3-lane road. I feel like a lot of South Tampa has those roads. I feel like they're incredibly dangerous. But I think to the point where one of the comments you were making earlier, Paula, the study that you did about the roads and speed limit differences between what the posted speed limit was and what the context classification, or what, in theory, the context zone or classification should be. Is part of this going to be, kind of marrying those two documents and saying, okay, we're going to reclassify these roads based on this guide, and then we're going to go back and make sure the speed limits all reflect that. And then related to that, when there are circumstances that the road is over-designed, could we, with resurface, for example, could we make them 10, 11-foot lanes with paint? So are that type of low, why we think of it like low-hanging fruit, lowering the speed limits, narrowing the lanes with paint? Is that kind of like the next phase of this, now that we've done this study and your previous study of the big differences between posted speed limit and what the road should be based on context?
Correct. This all started with a Vision Zero action plan that TPO had done, several years back, and that culminated then in the speed management action plan that was done a couple years ago. And it talked about it had statistics and how it relates to the crash and fatality rates that we have in Hillsborough County. So the Complete Streets Guide now builds upon that and says, we need to start following more of the national best practices in order so we can better design our streets to, one, safeguard the users, but also clearly get us off, the most deadliest, state and region in the nation. So we have to aggressively go after looking seriously about some of these things. So when we talk about speeds on the road, and this guide, the Complete Streets Guide, as a range, it tells you within this context, within this typology type, this is the range of speeds. So anytime streets are coming up for restriping or reconstruction or brand new, the designers and owners of these streets should look at what can we incorporate, either if it's a quick build, like you said, just simply restriping the lanes that are narrower, or providing other facilities that can control how people drive through a corridor to achieve that target speed. So that's the intent, that this guidelines are going to help us put forward better design principles and when to apply it based on the context. So all of these are going to start to work really well together, and ultimately even the technical design manuals will be updated, to reflect some of these better practices that are either in this guidebook or in the speed management action plan that was done a couple years ago.
Thank you.
Ms. Hinsdale.
Yes, I wondered if there are any specific guidelines, recommendations for school zones and park zones that we've been talking about, and other areas where there are going to be a lot of children. I mean, I've seen some really, NACTO has some really great stuff about designing for kids and how that can fit into the plan. And I wondered if that, we've talked about equitably looking at how the street is designed, but that's a sort of separate section of a street when there's a school on the street.
Correct. Our children are our biggest prize, right? We should design all our streets, honestly, for kids so they can navigate and they can be free and be able to get to school or get to grandma's house, come visit my house. We don't now have a chapter in this guide related to safe routes to school. There's obviously a lot of guidance already available on the topic. There's a lot of great practices already going on. We just made sure that when we talked about users within this document, that it reflects, those with disabilities, those that are old, those that are young, that is all inclusive. And we have to, when we think about streets, really thoroughly think about everybody that uses our streets. And our children are at risk the greatest. And the focus to really start in some of those areas closest to school by providing all the proper infrastructure, but also making sure that the speeds are appropriate for that environment.
Yeah, and I think it's important to add that the schools happen in every context. Schools occur in rural areas just as much as they do in urban or suburban areas. So what we talk about in the guidebook is how to get that street appropriate to the context. So the speed management techniques that you would use in those school zones can be tailored to the context of the surrounding built environment.
All right, I'm going to call on Mr. Josephson next. Are you there?
Larry, you should be able to mute yourself.
Yes, I got that.
Okay.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
First, I want to say, really appreciate the effort on the guidebook. Great concepts, great graphics. But with that being said, I think everybody needs to realize that implementing these type of changes is very hard because of the existing infrastructure, and it will take 10 to 30 years to implement this on a much bigger basis. And we are actually doing this currently, implementing some of these changes in small incremental steps in Hillsborough County. We have projects that we are lowering speeds. We have projects that we're, when we do resurfacing projects, we look at how we can narrow the lanes and put in narrow the travel lanes and see if we can put in bike lanes. On new projects, one of the projects that we're doing, Citrus Park Drive, we've come up with a system of buffered bike lanes that have delineators in them and RPMs to put more emphasis so the driver can see that's a separate lane that they should not actually be in. So we're implementing a lot of these issues, and we're also writing a new design manual, which is going to be called the Hillsborough County Transportation Design Manual, in which a lot of the concepts that Paula talked about are being implemented. In there, we talk about the target speeds and what kind of speeds that we're going to target for certain corridors and certain contexts. That manual we were supposed to produce this year, but couldn't because the context classifications for Hillsborough County weren't approved, and we're waiting for that approval. And we're going to change many of the typical sections that the county has to be context oriented, but we have to wait for that approval before that goes forward. One of the things that I wanted to say that, also all of these improvements can't be done without funding. Our funding budget was extremely hampered by the tax being canceled. So if you all have support for, in going ahead to get our commissioners to approve another tax program, without that funding, we can barely keep on top of just fixing the infrastructure. We have a lot of programs to improve intersections, safe routes to school, but without that funding, we can't move forward with a lot of these changes moving towards this context type of design. wanted to comment on a couple issues that were mentioned about utilities and so forth. Placing utilities is a really hard thing to do because it affects so much of the infrastructure. And what we rather see is the utilities, as opposed to what Paul had identified, don't place it where pedestrians are. We would rather see it in those areas where if a major reconstruction needs to be done, that it be done in an area where there's grass and limited infrastructure. If you place it adjacent to the roadway, you know, when you have to cut in 5 or 8 feet down to service a utility, you have to tear up a lot of roadway and major things in the road that are much more costly than replacing just a sidewalk and grass. So putting the utilities out there on the outsides away from the road is a budget item that, you know, needs to be considered, and also disruption to you know, emergency vehicles and so forth. Next, I would like to comment, I saw a graphic on emergency vehicles, and that particular graphic showed an emergency vehicle going down the center of a 2-way left turn lane. We are moving away from making these continuous left-hand turn lanes. Bloomingdale Avenue had that on there a couple of years ago when we resurfaced that road. People were using that as a travel lane to bypass people. And what we had to do to prevent that was put islands and reconfigure the left-hand turn lane to have left turns only, because people were using that as a bypass lane, very dangerous. And we put concrete islands because if they hit the concrete islands at speed, it's not going to be beneficial to their vehicles. We are addressing crash issues, and you know, some of these context type of things that we're doing. We put out a bulletin, technical bulletin, that within the urban boundary and the 1-mile buffer zone of the urban boundary, we eliminated passing zones. So there are no more passing zones within the urban boundary. For years, the county was going out and resurfacing. They didn't have plans on resurfacing. They did an estimate of what they needed to resurface, and then they told the contractor, just replace the striping out there. But with the increase in growth and urban growth and the many driveways that intersect many of our roads, there were too many cars coming in from the sides to allow passing zones. So we eliminated that. One of the first projects that we eliminated that on was Lynn Turner Road. It was number 5 or 6 in the high crash corridor program. We put double yellow striping down the entire road from Gunn to Ehrlich, and it decreased the crashes by 37%.
Mr. Josephson? Hello?
Yes.
Can you,
yes.
Can you please wrap this up?
Okay, yeah. So we're implementing a lot of these things in small incremental steps to achieve, you know, Vision Zero, to, you know, also help achieve context. So I just wanted to state that, you know, the county is currently working on all that right now, and it's something that we're implementing.
All right, thank you, Mr. Josephson. We have time for one more question. Peter, you got this one, right?
Yeah. So I agree with the crowd, I'm happy to see us taking the information available from.
Can't hear you. Can you speak up or speak towards the microphones, please?
I'm glad to see that we're studying case studies and examples that are seen nationwide and throughout our own county. I'm wondering if there's a plan to update the guide once it's published, whether it be yearly or based on case studies within our own county. Is there a plan to update the guide once it's published?
We actually hadn't really thought very formally about an update schedule for the guide. But yeah, I mean, that's obviously something that that we should consider, that as information and new studies come out, that the guide be updated and outdated stuff be removed and new things be put in. A very good idea.
Okay, again, thank you both for this, this wonderful information. I'm not sure, Lisa, do we need a motion to present this?
No motion. This is a status report. I would like to add a couple things that came in through the chat, and then you can wrap it up and introduce the companion related topic. Somebody's got their microphone. Okay, good. Okay, so Ginger at FDOT commented on something that I would like to also personally say. So the technical manuals and the MUTCD manuals that have to be followed, because they are the law where the rubber meets the road, and that's where we go get those dimensions to build the roads. Those are companion in the next step to having a guide. So definitely excited to see that happen. Me personally, when I was a Livable Roadways member and staff, we did the Livable Roadways guidelines. So again, very similar name, very similar concepts, but there was not a lot of change because the technical manuals and how we go out and design stormwaters and utilities did not get updated to reflect all of those guidelines. So very much interested in partnering, getting that accomplished, because we're not getting towards zero anytime fast with the way they are. So appreciate all the efforts the county's doing, but there's more we can radically do. So I'm glad to see the guide. And then Sarah said, referencing an earlier comment, that she really liked the idea of the neighborhoods taking ownership and stewardship of their complete street, such as like adopt the bus shelter example. That's all I have in the chat.
Thank you very much. Again, thank you both for this information. I'm just going to add my little 2 cents worth. Everybody in this room would like to see these type of plans go through, whether it be children getting to school safer, people being able to walk on sidewalks without telephone poles being in the middle of them, people being able to ride their bicycles in designated bicycle lanes. Me personally, I would like to see every road in the city of Tampa 30 miles an hour. I'd like to see no more right turns on red unless there's a specific light arrow for that right-hand turn. But we are so polarized. There are people that want this, and there are people that are saying, no, I have a car. I want to drive as fast as I can to get to work, damn it. I'm hoping that there is going to be some middle ground so we don't scare a lot of people off, or they call my office and complain. Again, I thank you very much for this report. Let's see if we can't get most of this done accomplished. Thank you again. Now, okay, there is Miss Katrina Cochran on the line, who has something related with the mobility section. Cochran, are you there?
Yes, I am. My name is Katrina Corcoran, and just one moment, I will be sharing my screen.
Okay, while she's doing that, can I just apologize to the committee? We had a very, very brief like mention of this last month, and then Katrina's going to go into a little more detail this month. I thought since we had gotten a small briefing last month, we were complete on it. But this is a companion to what we're doing. It sets the policy that makes the guidebook that Hillsborough County is doing possible, among other things.
Ms. Corcoran, how long are you going to be taking on this?
I believe the presentation will be 15 minutes or less.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. As I mentioned, my name is Katrina Corcoran. I'm a senior planner with the Planning Commission. I am the co-lead on the update of the Hillsborough County Comprehensive Plan Mobility Section Text Amendment, or HCCPA 2116. My co-lead is also Rich Clarendon with the TPO, who is also on this call today. And I know that some of you have heard this presentation before or been involved in the working group process, so I will try to be concise and get through this quickly today. So some background information. This is the mobility section, formerly or currently adopted as the transportation element of the unincorporated Hillsborough County Comprehensive Plan. It is part of the Community and Built Environment chapter, which also includes future land use and housing. Now, this has been a very collaborative process with several county staff and others. We've had several working group meetings on various topics addressed within the mobility section. Representation on the working group includes staff from Plant Hillsborough, so myself, the Planning Commission, as well as the TPO. Hillsborough County, including Hillsborough County Public Works, Community and Infrastructure Planning, HART, and then of course other staff based on topic area. So other folks have joined us based on a variety of topics. And we would also like to thank county staff in particular that have been involved in almost every meeting on this. It has been a very collaborative process that I think has made the language better for that collaboration. So looking at implementation, the mobility section policies will impact or be implemented through regulations and ordinances, capital projects, education and outreach, and collaboration with other implementing agencies, for example, HART. This slide indicates the key changes to the mobility section as it transitions from the transportation element to the mobility section. One thing I would like to mention is that the current transportation element was last significantly updated or last updated in 2008. So there is a need to update this language as comprehensive plans are typically updated every 7 to 10 years. The mobility section has a new focus on equity. So if you look at our draft language, which is available on our project page, you'll notice that there are only a couple of policies that have been retained from the current transportation element, whereas we have a lot of new objectives and policy language related to equity itself. We are also working to institutionalize Vision Zero. So in this situation, the transportation element currently has a lot of safety related language. However, it does not incorporate Vision Zero since it was last updated in 2008. So we've updated the language around that, updating the safety aspects of that. We have language addressing resiliency in transportation. We have some language on establishing multimodal level or quality of service standards. And one note on that, the working group is still discussing these standards, and ultimately these standards would live in the capital improvements element, or CIE. We have included language on coordinating transit service with land use, and that has been discussed in depth with HART staff that have been involved in our working group. We have a building a smart system section, which includes leveraging benefits of the county's advanced traffic management systems. We've worked to update outdated references and concepts. For example, removing outdated plans, references to things like that. We have a new section on preparing for emerging technologies, so that includes things such as Uber and Lyft, all the way to connected and autonomous vehicles. And finally, we are incorporating context-based roadway planning and design principles. As you heard on the Complete Streets Guidebook, that goes into the context classifications definition and map, which will be adopted as a part of this update to the mobility section. So moving right along, this slide shows the overview of the goals and contents of the mobility section. We do have 6 main goals of the mobility section, which I will go over in more detail in the next 6 slides. We also have an implementation and monitoring section, which is essentially a reference page to documents such as the Complete Streets Guidebook and technical manuals that were already mentioned. So as those are brought forward and implemented, we will update this reference page so that readers of the policy language are aware of those related documents. And finally, we have an assessment of conditions. So we'll be updating a number of the current transportation element maps. They're severely outdated. Most of these maps are not adopted. However, I would like to note the context classification map would be adopted as a part of the mobility section text amendment. Our first goal is to achieve equitable outcomes, and it reads to build a transportation system that supports the needs of all users with respect to ability, resources, identity, and mode preference. Our objectives include engaging the public to ensure everyone can collaborate and provide input on transportation planning and implementation, considering both positive and negative physical and mental health impacts of transportation projects, and finally, recognizing and avoiding repeating past injustices, so striving to alleviate or mitigate disproportionate burdens on underserved communities. Our second goal is to achieve Vision Zero by providing a multimodal transportation system that prioritizes the safety of all roadway users. So Vision Zero, as you all are aware, is an international movement to reduce severe injuries and fatalities on our roadways. Our objectives include using an integrated safe systems approach to develop and design improvements. And one note, a safe systems approach is sort of the engineering solution to Vision Zero, or the engineering approach, very similar to Vision Zero, where it allows tolerance on a roadway for those using facilities on it. We will also protect vulnerable users, such as children and the elderly, through that safe systems approach, speed management, and context-sensitive multimodal facility design. We have an objective on assisting in equitable education and fair enforcement of traffic laws for all roadway users. And finally, we will have use that safe systems approach to identify and improve high injury corridors. So that includes collaboration with other agencies involved with Vision Zero and referencing the TPO's performance crash reduction targets. Our third goal is to maintain the system in good repair, preserve assets, and improve resiliency to climate change. Our objectives here include maintaining existing transportation infrastructure while repairing or replacing deficient facilities, supporting the maintenance of public transportation assets, so that includes Sunshine Line, and then supporting HART where the county can in terms of, for example, a sidewalk near a bus stop, completing that. And finally, maintaining or improving the capability of the multimodal system to evacuate vulnerable populations, as well as enhancing the system's resiliency to withstand and recover from a disaster. And I would like to note that this objective is the evacuating vulnerable populations is required by state statute. Our fourth goal is to provide choices when not driving, and it reads to create a sustainable transportation system that allows people to take their mode of choice to access necessities, opportunities, recreation, and each other. We have several objectives here, and they include balancing vehicular capacity with fiscal, environmental, social, or economic outcomes. A lot of the policy language there focuses on deficient and constrained roadways. As I mentioned in the beginning, we do have some policy language on establishing and maintaining multimodal level of service standards, so going beyond traditional vehicular LOS. We have an objective on new development providing mobility fees to mitigate its impact on the multimodal network, updating the corridor preservation plan, and ensuring adequate multimodal corridors. Several objectives related to HART, including supporting and collaborating with them to increase frequency to higher density and intensity areas and transit-dependent communities. And finally, building a comprehensive bicycle and pedestrian system for additional trip purposes beyond just recreational use. Our fifth goal is to build a smart system that utilizes technology and strategies to improve safety, efficiency, and reliability for all modes of transportation and to meet the needs of all users. Our objectives include addressing deficient roadways and safety of all users for enhanced traffic flow through technological solutions, as well as modernizing the county's traffic management center, increasing person trips and reducing vehicle miles traveled through transportation demand management. So strategies such as shifting away from the single occupancy vehicles to carpooling, van pooling, things such as telecommuting, as I'm doing right now, implementing comprehensive multimodal parking and curb space management programs. So for the curb space management, that includes high activity areas where there's a lot of Uber and Lyft drop off or pickup or grocery delivery, that sort of thing. Pursuing corridor widening strategically only after lower cost alternatives have been considered. Improving multimodal connections to military installations, tourist destinations, several other intermodal terminals. And finally, monitoring and supporting emerging technologies and strategies for transportation facilities. Again, as I mentioned in the beginning, this includes everything such as Uber and Lyft, to e-bikes and scooters, to even connected and autonomous vehicles. So looking forward to how the county can plan for those transportation technologies and strategies. Finally, our sixth goal is to ensure compatibility with context. This really gets into what Paula was discussing with the context classification system within the Complete Streets Guidebook. The goal provides a multimodal transportation system that supports planned future land use, respects historical and cultural assets, supports the identity of the surrounding community, and protects the natural environment. Again, our first objective here is to design roadways appropriate to the future land use category that they traverse. So this is primarily the context classification definitions and map. As you can see in the graphic on the top right, this looks a bit more at the different types of context that Paula went into more detail on. Other objectives include minimizing adverse impacts to residential and commercial neighborhoods and environmentally sensitive lands through corridor studies, protecting neighborhoods from adverse impacts of through traffic and speeds while providing reasonable access to and from those areas, and finally, constructing complete streets to achieve safety, comfort, and aesthetics for all expected users and modes. This objective really plays into the Complete Streets Guidebook work. As I mentioned, we do have an implementation and monitoring section that will be updated as guidance documents and standards are available. We are currently in the July cycle of plan amendments for the mobility section. So we are currently conducting public outreach. We have briefed the Planning Commission as of yesterday. And we have some more upcoming presentations to other TPO committees. As was mentioned, other county documents or implementation documents include the Complete Streets Guidebook, the Transportation Design Manual and Technical Manual, as well as the Corridor Preservation Plan update, which is just beginning the work on that. We do have a project page, which I presented to you during your last meeting. There you can review the draft language. It will be updated as we receive comments. You can see what's new versus existing and compare the existing adopted language with the proposed via what we call crosswalks that are available at the bottom of the project page. You can review previous presentations, such as this one, which will be uploaded shortly, as well as other background information. We have upcoming meeting dates posted there as well. As I mentioned, we are in the throes of public outreach, so we are still consolidating a lot of comments. We have an upcoming virtual public meeting on September 23rd from 6 to 7 p.m. After that, we will be going to the CAC as well as BPAC with the same presentation, as well as potentially the Hillsborough CAC, potentially the Hillsborough Greenways if they have availability for that presentation. And we will be going to the Planning Commission for a public hearing on November 8th. We do also have a briefing, I apologize, with the BOCC on September 28th, and then going back to the Planning Commission, and finally a public transmittal hearing with the BOCC set for December 16th. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes my presentation. I am happy to answer any questions that you may have. I know that Matt Lewis is also here on the call for any questions related to county topics. But thank you very much for your time, and hopefully I got through that relatively quickly.
Any comments or questions? Mr. Hay.
Hey, Katrina, it's David. I may be getting into the weeds, but I know in the city we have had struggles dealing with the bridge between land use and mobility due to, and this is as a reviewer, I think we've done an excellent job in our corridors, but when we get development next to a corridor, the struggle sometimes is connecting the development to the corridor. Seems to occur very easily for roadway, but for vehicular connections, but a lot of times it seems to kind of fall through where we're forcing people to walk into drive aisles to get to a use. I know this is that I'm just wondering if is there a section in the county's plan dealing with this kind of merging of the land use because of that. It kind of doesn't really fall into because part of it has to be in the corridor and part of it has to be on the private property. So it sometimes is missed. is there like enabling language or anything that tries to bridge that land use mobility kind of gap?
We do have some policy language related to connectivity and making sure that there are those connections for pedestrians and other users. So there is a bit of that. I will say that I expect there to be further connectivity language with the update of the future land use element, which is forthcoming at this time. But that would be my answer unless Rich has anything to add to that.
You good?
I'm good.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you very much for your report.
Thank you.
We are quickly approaching our finishing time, and I do not want any of these agenda items to be cut short, but just letting you know that. Mr. Murphy, Mr. Easton, are you on with us?
Mr. Eaton, actually, yes, I'm here.
Sorry.
Good morning. Yeah, this is Joe Murphy with DOT. How are y'all?
Doing fine, thank you.
Good. Bear with me just a minute. I've not done a lot of presenting on this, so we're gonna, do I have presenting capability, Lisa?
You gotta unmute yourself.
Yeah, Lisa, I'm.
Sorry. I sent you the presenter invite. It should have shown up as a pop-up to accept, but I have your PowerPoint up and ready if that's not going to be easy. Yes, okay.
Oh, you're my,
So
you'll present for me. Thank you so much.
Yep, showing my screen. All right. You guys seeing his PowerPoint in the room?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Perfect. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for the invite. I'm Joe Murphy. I'm the acquisition administrator with DOT and District 7 in Tampa. Josh Eaton is with me. He's a senior relocation agent here. And I know the last two presentations kind of went together. What we were asked to do was kind of give you an overview of the acquisition process. I think you guys spend a lot of time in the design and planning stages. And so we were asked to come in and give you a brief overview. We're doing acquisition on the downtown interchange right now, and this presentation is kind of set up toward that project. So we'll get started with it. So the right to buy property for public good began all the way back in the Constitution, and it actually followed us over here from Europe. They're taking private lands for public good has been going on since biblical times. But we're covered under the U.S. Constitution, the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment, and the several titles shown here. Next slide. The document that really outlines and controls how we acquire and relocate is the Uniform Relocation Assistance and Real Property Acquisition Policies Act. This establishes what we have to do in order to buy and relocate people from projects. Next slide. In DOT, our acquisition fundamentals are that we have as much personal contact with property owners and tenants. It's never a fun process when the government wants your property, your private property. So we spend a lot of time trying to handhold property owners. We explain the process right up front and their rights, and we give them a written offer of just compensation. And then they're given time during the relocation process, in fact, several times throughout the acquisition process, to negotiate. We pay the property owner no matter what. A lot of people talk about the state took my property, the county took my property. There's always payment.
yes, they have to give up their property, but no matter what, they're paid for it. And on top of that, we pay for their attorney and their any experts they need as far as appraisers, engineers, or whatever to bring it through. Next slide. To provide budget information, we do right-of-way cost estimates. We did this presentation for the CAC back in July, I believe, and there was a early talk that, you know, Zillow values didn't exactly match our right-of-way cost estimates and in the budget we had set for this. So we don't use Zillow. We have each property is independently valued on top of the value of the land and improvements and damages and cost and cures that we consider going in. We have additions for administrative costs, our labor costs, litigation awards, mediation costs. Everybody has experts. We have experts, they have experts. Everybody gets paid. Defense attorney fees and relocation costs associated with that. Next slide. The right-of-way process begins for us, when our surveying and mapping people send the maps over to us. It's called a 268 date. That's when production starts. We start getting appraisals in. We order appraisals, we get them in, we make offers, we negotiate, we go to court if we have to. And then after we have bought everything, it flips over to property management for any demolition or hazardous material stuff. This next slide is a timeline or a flow chart, I'm sorry, of the process, somewhat simplified. But it begins when we send them notification that we're coming. And you'll notice that after we make the offer, they have an opportunity to negotiate. If we don't reach an agreement, even after we file condemnation, negotiations continue following down that right-hand line. Even after condemnation, after we file to go to trial, after mediation, negotiations still continue. At the end of the day, we either agree on price or a jury determines the price. Eminent domain is the only court case that's heard by a jury of 12 other than capital murder. That's how seriously everybody takes condemnation and property acquisition. But we have a very high settlement rate. Very seldom does anything go to trial. We go to orders of taking quite often, just more or less to meet schedule dates. But well over 90% of properties we either mediate or negotiate to a settlement. Next slide. This is our time frame for the downtown interchange. We have 500, and if you look at the orange line, we have roughly 530 days from beginning to end in our schedule to acquire the downtown interchange. That includes appraisal review, negotiations, condemnation, and property management on this one. Next slide. The time frame for the downtown interchange, we actually started appraisal services back in May. We're now starting to get appraisals in, and they go through our review process, and we'll be through there sometime between now and October, depending on how long it takes to review the parcels out. We anticipate offers going out to the owners between October and November. And then you'll notice our negotiation time is from October of 21 to January of 23. Parcels go to suit in June of 22 just to meet timeframes. Due to COVID, all the court systems are backed up for everything. So we have to give a little bit more lead time in there. And we've got a project certification date of January of 2023 on this. And we anticipate meeting that. So that in a nutshell is the acquisition process. Josh is going to take over from here and walk you through the relocation process, which is somewhat a little more tedious than acquisition. But he'll walk you through that, and then we'll do questions after Josh gets finished. Josh?
All right, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, and we're on a tight timeline, so if you can be, that'd be
I'll
great.
be as quick as I can. So anyway, glad to be with you guys. I am actually a consultant. I work for Independence Acquisition and Appraisal, but I've been working at the DOT embedded as a consultant for the past 7+ years in relocation specifically. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. I guess we need to go back a slide. Joe alluded to this already. The main document that guides our work is the Uniform Relocation Act. This was significant legislation because prior to this, there was no protection for people being displaced from their homes, none whatsoever. It was we acquire the property and then they just have to move. So this provides, has provided a basis for how we do everything in relocation. So that way there's fair and consistent treatment. Next slide, please. So when does the Uniform Act apply? I mean, we've really adopted it here at FDOT to apply on anything we do, but anytime federal dollars are used in any phase of the project, we have to follow the Uniform Act. So basically everything I'm going to discuss from this point out is about the Uniform Act. Next slide, please. 4 components of relocation assistance. We're going to be touching on each of these in the next few slides: planning, notices, advisory services, and payments. Next slide, please. And I am going a little faster than I intended, but I know time is of an essence at this point. So as far as relocation planning, as Joe kind of alluded to, I mean, we're planning well in advance of us being out there making offers and presenting relocation eligibilities and having an appraisal. Well before an alignment is selected, we're looking at all the different alternatives, and we're looking at what kind of impacts there are, how many businesses are going to be impacted, how many households will need to move, what are the income levels in those areas, what's the ethnic makeup, what kind of ability to meet their needs are there going to be as far as housing. So we're looking at all that well in advance during the conceptual stage. Next slide, please. As far as once we do make an offer, so we're fast forwarding a little bit in the process, these are some of the relocation notices that are going to be presented to tenants, to homeowners. We're of course going to give a brochure. We're of course going to give a statement of relocation eligibility. That's going to be, and we're going to talk more about this, but that's additional money to go towards the purchase or rental of a replacement home. A 90-day letter of assurance just means we're assuring that you have at least 90 days to relocate. And obviously we can't require anybody to relocate unless we own the property. And then of course there's a 30-day notice to vacate. Sometimes that's a little more time than that, but it's the amount of time to where they know that they must vacate. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. So after we've done all the conceptual review of the project, we have our alignment, we're doing appraisals, we're going into the neighborhoods, we're meeting with each and every household on a one-on-one basis. We're trying to understand their family needs, their household needs, what desires they have, any special needs that impact housing. For tenants, we're also looking at income, and our calculations are going to be based on income if they're considered low income. But we're there every step of the way as relocation agents. We get very deeply involved, and we're really kind of like dual agents. We do work on behalf of the department, so we're an agent for them, but we're also an agent for the person being impacted. Some of the things that we provide are real estate listings, where we'll connect them with a real estate professional if needed. We'll offer transportation. They can come into my vehicle and I'll take them to see properties. But every situation is unique. Our goal is a successful relocation. Next slide, please. So as far as relocation payments, that's what I'm going to be talking about from here. That's going to be different payments for tenants and property owners. They have different eligibilities, so there's going to be different payments. One important thing to understand is that all relocation income is not considered taxable income by the IRS. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about the replacement housing payment for a homeowner and what payments go into that. There's basically three. The first one is a purchase additive. That's just basically additional money to go towards buying a replacement home. Incidental expenses, we're going to reimburse eligible closing costs. Usually we have that at closing. If not, we can pay them after the fact, but most things are covered. Things like appraisals, home inspections, recording fees, title search, title insurance. We pay all those closing costs. And then the mortgage interest differential payment, that's if there's going to be an increased interest rate on the mortgage. It's not really happening much right now because rates are so low. Okay, next slide, please. As far as replacement housing payment for tenants, it's very different because we're looking at the difference between what they're paying for rent and utilities right now versus what it would cost in the market. And rental rates have gone up insanely over the past year. So we're going to have some very large payments probably. But income is a factor, as I said on that. The federal government doesn't want more than 30% of income going to housing. So if they're considered a low-income household, we're actually going to have the 30% threshold be the basis versus what it will cost to rent something else. And that money, as soon as they lease a property and they've moved in, that money is fully payable. So it's just a lump sum that they're going to have to go towards rent for the next 42 months. And that money, if they don't want to rent something, can go towards the down payment supplement. They can actually have a down payment and be able to buy a replacement home. So we'll go to the next page. That's one of my favorite things, by the way, to take somebody from a tenant to an owner. As far as moving cost reimbursement, hardly anybody does it based on a self-move or receipts. Most people, if they move themselves, are going to do it based on a room count schedule. So, you know, say you have a 6-room house, we have a certain number for that. And once the move's done, they do it themselves, they're paid. Or we can hire a professional mover. That's the way I would go. I don't really want to mess with that. So I'd rather hire somebody to do it. They'll box it up, they'll pack it up, they'll load it, move them, and we can pay them directly. They never have to pay a dime. Next page, please. There is an appeal process, which is a really good thing because sometimes there's a lot of gray area in relocation. Sometimes somebody doesn't agree with the decision we've made here locally. They can appeal that decision to Tallahassee and have somebody in Tallahassee review that claim that they're making, and they can actually reverse the district decision. If they uphold our decision, they can actually take it to an administrative hearing. Next slide. That really concludes our presentation. We'll take any questions. I know your time's limited, but we'll answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you, gentlemen, for this update. I appreciate it very much. Any comments or any questions?
I'll just add, I'm Lisa Silva. Clearly, I don't work for the Department of Transportation, but in a prior life, I was a consultant. And I, for a time, did eminent domain work for both the department and the private sector. And I lived through this process, and there are a lot of impressive steps and services available, you know, more so than I could have imagined, especially in the state of Florida. So I thought it was a great learning opportunity for our committees to understand what all goes into condemning and then taking the parcels to widen a road or any other public entity. So thank you so much.
Okay, Mr. Menendez.
I'll also say I used to work for the DOT, and what people don't realize is usually the department will pay more than the property is actually worth. So when you hear somebody complain about, oh, we took the property from you, they took your property, but you did real well. Anyway.
No, thanks for information. I just have one quick question, very quickly. And you can give me a yes or no answer. Is there a statute of limitation on which the entity that claims eminent domain can own that property? It seems to me that there's a heck of a lot of properties around 275 and I-4 that have been there for 30, 40 years that could be used for prime affordable housing. Yes or no? All right, gentlemen, thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question. Thanks.
Okay, how long can a entity own these properties before they are either can be put up for sale again, or reintroduced into the governmental authority that they're in.
Yeah, I'm
You're
confused.
muted. Joe,
Is
you're
this-
muted, I think. I don't know that there's a limit to how long the department can own it.
The department owns the property. So the limit is the same length of time you're allowed to own property.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on to our next agenda item. Who are we hearing from? Miss Sarah McKinley?
Well, I would suggest, as I texted you, we're going to lose our quorum in the room because several people have communicated they have to get going. And the HART TOD presentation is a bit longer than the ones we've already seen. So maybe Sarah could just make the announcements that she has at the end of the presentation, if you're so inclined.
Yeah, I can go through it pretty quickly if that's what you want. I mean, skip through just the highlights so that we are planning a workshop in the mid to late October. I should have the date set any hour now, hopefully, and we can get that to you. But just for a quick overview, this is HART's, oh, do you have my screen? Oh, there it goes, okay. Thanks, Lisa. This is HART's TOD project. Do you see the presentation? Yes, okay. So let me see, right click. All right. This is an FTA grant that HART received in December of 2019. They kicked it off in March 2020, and we've been working since then. Many of you are already very aware of transit-oriented development. It's looking at how to design places to capitalize better access to transit. Specifically, a lot of this has been looking at the walkability and bikeability, the first mile, last mile solutions, specifically around the proposed transit stations on the corridor. So far, the consultants looked at the existing conditions along the corridor, and then also some strategies to help promote transit-oriented development. We are working along with a couple other studies on the corridor, the HART Arterial BRT, Bus Rapid Transit, as well as the Tampa Streetcar Extension. Those both feed into this corridor, which here is the study area. It's from the southern portion of downtown using Florida Avenue and Tampa Street, up Florida Avenue to Linebaugh, over to Nebraska, east on Fowler, and then up to the university area. We looked at the context of the land use, whereas the middle portion of the study area, you see a lot of the residential with only minimal retail along the corridor, whereas the north-south or northern portion and southern portions are where you see a lot of the other non-residential uses. Those north and southern portions are also expected to be high growth areas, and they're also currently considered underserved communities as well, based on the populations that live there. A lot of these areas also live below the poverty level, as well as consist of zero vehicle households. So that's why improved transit along this corridor is so important. The consultant looked at the form and character along the corridor, and from north to south, you see a wide range of different characteristics of development, starting with the typical downtown. Then we get into lower densities of your sort of Main Street with the single family housing. And then in the northern portions, again, we get more into the auto-oriented I guess, post-auto development with the bigger lots and underused with seas of parking, that kind of thing. The consultant looked at where are the opportunities for TOD, especially looking at some of the proposed stop locations and the different opportunities, as specifically the suburban retrofit that we see in the northern portion of the county, with a lot of those larger parcels, such as the water Avenue where the old dog track is, and the old Kmart, and then around the university area with the mall and those sorts of things. As far as the strategies that the consultant looked at, the first one was looking at improving the walkable or walk and bikeability along the corridor. These two pictures were actually taken across the street from each other. The existing shows what's typical along Florida Avenue, the narrow sidewalks, no buffers, with utilities in the way, fences along the inside portion, and then what is sort of planned. This is one of the new mid-rise apartments along the corridor. As you see, a wider sidewalk, sort of landscaping and buffering between the street to provide more comfortable atmosphere. So the consultant looked at sort of where the existing traffic signals are, where the planned crossings, and then some of the strategies for helping with the safety of the corridor, looking at the speed management. As you know, the TPO has just wrapped up the speed management plan. So looking at some of the strategies throughout that, lowering speeds, looking at the pedestrian facilities, where could additional mid-block crossings go, looking at pavement markings and lightings and better streetscapes, how to improve the stop locations, with the bike facilities, looking at how can we improve connections between existing and planned trails, as well as the expansion of bike share and micromobility. And then also, again, making sure we have those setbacks and limiting the driveway cuts for providing those facilities. Great. I know I'm going through this fast, so almost there though. This looks at the housing affordability within the study area, looking at sort of what is considered legally restricted affordable housing versus naturally occurring affordable housing, which looks at those lower income households. And when looking at that naturally occurring affordable housing, pretty much the bulk of that inventory is north of the river. So in those areas where you'll see probably a lot of the most suburban retrofit, but also making sure that we can provide for affordable housing within the rest of the corridor while preserving the affordability of the housing north of the river too. So these are just some strategies that were looked at. I'm not going to go through each of them, but they're sort of just looking at programs, options, regulatory options, funding mechanisms or sources, and partnerships are all sort of some things that the consultant has looked at. There's also the missing middle that has been looked at as part of this. And this is looking at sort of those smaller footprint houses up to smaller footprint apartment buildings that could be better and possibly more affordable options within the area to help sort of transition between some of the redevelopment that'll come with retail, as well as buffering between the existing housing. And then as far as sort of the place types and TOD types that we've been looking at, again, these are little tools to help guide and ensure that we can have that appropriate guidance for the type of building and form that we would like to see within the corridor. So we sort of identified throughout the corridor different types of centers and neighborhoods along the way. The first one being the downtown, the southern portion. Again, the most transit rich, the most intense buildings, smaller blocks, most walkable. That's where you see the taller buildings and structured parking. Then we move into our urban centers. This is looking at the Palm Avenue, which the consultant will be moving in the next month, looking at redesign workshops of the Palm Avenue station location, also the Water Avenue, the possibility of the station there, and then Fowler to the university area. These are more of the middle intensity, having the parking structured, but in the back with still the development up facing the street, wider sidewalks, still providing that landscaping and all those kinds of things. And this is just showing examples of what the suburban retrofit could look like too, possibly mid-block parking with dual buildings on each side. And again, phased development from the street on. And then these are just some examples of what you can see, sort of more mid-rise development with, again, active retail and wider sidewalks. We then go into the TOD centers, and these are a little less intense. These are sort of 3 to 5 stories, looking at infill along the corridor, mixed use, and then this is where the middle housing comes in, just sort of behind the initial development that's facing the street. And this is sort of an example of what can be shown along Fowler Avenue or done along Fowler Avenue as well. We then go into the TOD corridors. These are sort of in between those station locations. Again, 2 to 4 stories. So getting a little less intense, still with everything up facing the street, but again, pushed back enough so that we provide the safe walking facilities. And then in between that, we get into the TOD neighborhoods, and this will look at mainly the missing middle, providing the sort of a little more dense, but not as intense as sort of an apartment building. A lot looking at townhouses and that. So with that, that is my presentation. As I mentioned, we are working on finalizing the date any minute now for an October workshop with the Planning Commission and the TOD or the TPO committees. So we'll send that notice out to you as soon as possible, and hopefully the study will wrap up by the end of the year. And this is the contacts for the project managers with HART and HDR if you have any further questions. But with that, that is it.
Thank you very much. With our limited group left, is there any comments or any questions?
Well, without any disrespect to the other 2 presentations, this one should have gone first. That's just my opinion.
Ms. Silva, is there any old or new business we need to discuss?
Yeah, just real quickly. The TPO did approve our modified quorum requirements, but we absolutely have to meet that 9-person in the room going forward. So you are expected to attend, but we can't accommodate more than 9. So please do keep responsive so we can keep meeting in person. And thank you for those that did today.
If I may suggest, send out a notice today requesting that we have confirmation from 9 people for next month's meeting, please.
Okay, I'll send it extra early. Okay, meeting, thank you. And then just a little reminder and heads up, this committee is going to be selecting the Gulf Coast Safe Streets Vision Zero Hero or Bob the Builder Award for our Hillsborough TPO for the Regional Gulf Coast Summit. So that deadline is online and it's this Friday. So there aren't a lot of candidates and nominees yet. So please put your thinking caps on and submit those so we have a robust list to select from. That will be on your agenda next month.
Can you please send an email requesting that to all the board members, please? Sure. Just a reminder.
Yep. And there's some things in the chat that I'll also share with the group. And then a reminder that the Park Speed Zone that I presented at a previous meeting, the outreach period is now. The flyer is attached to your thing. I've sent it to you electronically. If you could help push that out, especially to the city neighborhoods. I've gotten a lot of feedback on the Upper Tampa Bay Trail, but not so much on the other 2 parks. And then also another outreach effort that the TPO is doing is the trail alignments connecting the Green Artery up to the USF area, a project that Wade Reynolds has been managing. That flyer is also attached, and they're on social media, etc. So if you could help us blast that out, that'd be awesome. Sorry for the technical snafus today. So
are you finished?
Yep.
We are adjourned.